way from energy summits to job fairs to town hall meetings to you name it. And they are working so hard on workforce development to get our workforce ready to take advantage of this opportunity that's coming with the Marcellus and the Utica Shale. So, Dr. Meeks, thank you so much for being here. But I told that story about farming with mules to a guy in Washington, D.C. once, and he stopped me in the middle of my presentation and said, well, that's silly. Why mules? Why didn't you use a tractor? I said, well, we didn't have a tractor. He said, why didn't you borrow one? I said, you don't understand, sir, we had to borrow the mule. My grandfather and I used to walk a couple of miles to pick up the mule that we borrowed from another farmer that lived not too far away. And my grandfather would pay for that mule with 2 5-gallon buckets of corn. And then when you go back in the evenings, we'd take another 2 5-gallon buckets. The good side of that was the mule carried the other 2 5-gallon buckets of corn back. But that's the way things were done back then. And I can tell you that my quality of life is much better than my parents', where we started out with no indoor plumbing. Working, I can't remember a day growing up on that farm when there weren't chores to do. I told you I would tell you about my voice. I'm suffering from bronchitis today. And somebody said, well, why didn't you stay home and take care of it? Well, growing up on the farm, the pigs had to be fed, the chickens had to be fed, the eggs had to be collected, the peas had to be shelled. If you didn't do those things, you didn't eat. And so it's just kind of a work ethic that I've been taught since I was a child, that unless I'm crippled, unless I'm laid up and can't move, I'm going to get out and do what I'm being paid to do. So I'm not asking for a pat on the back for that. I'm just trying to explain to you why I talk like a frog, and I may have to get some water as we move along. But certainly my life is better than my parents'. Next chart. Bill, click the clicker. How many of you think that your children's quality of life will be better than yours?
I'm worried about that.
So many Americans are worried about that. So many Americans are worried about the mounting debt that we are accumulating. The health care system that is falling apart, that is threatening our seniors' access to medical care. A health care law that took $500 billion out of Medicare last year, $500 billion to pay for this failed policy. Those are the kinds of things that we're leaving. That's the legacy that we're leaving to our children and our grandchildren, and it's something that we have got to turn around. This is not a political discussion. This is a discussion about honesty, integrity. It's about America's future and what kind of country America is going to be and how we're going to go about getting there. Here are some things that we know for sure. There's a lot we don't know, but there are some things that we know for sure. Our federal government continues to make promises that it knows it cannot keep. It's promised Medicare and Social Security for today's seniors and future generations, but just within the last couple of weeks, we've been told by the Medicare actuaries that Medicare is going broke by 2024, 12 years from now, much sooner than anyone thought. We'll talk about that tonight as we get into some of these discussions. Social Security. Not going to have enough money to pay Social Security benefits beyond 2033. We will begin to see not enough money in the Social Security Trust Fund to pay those bills. How did we get here, and how do we get out of that mess? We've got some ideas on how to do that. Washington has a spending problem that needs to be fixed. This administration has created a massive amount of debt. Now, it wasn't the only administration that created debt, but it has gone to limits unbefore seen. A $3.8 trillion budget. More federal spending. $2 trillion in increased taxes on America's job creators. That's the kind of plan that this administration has for America's future. I'm going to give you some alternatives on what I believe that our plan should be. Our continued failure to address this problem has set us on an unsustainable fiscal path. We're going to go broke if we don't stop. When our children become our age, the federal government will consume almost 40% of our economy. That's not what our founders had in mind when they put this great nation in place. It's time for the government to tighten its belt and balance its budget, just like every working family and every business in America has to do. I think everybody in this room is very well aware it's been 3 years since the Senate of the United States has passed a budget. In 2010, the Congress before I came into office, the House didn't even pass a budget. We've passed a budget, Senate to the Senate twice, 2011 and 2012, designed to address many of our country's ailments. But they sit languishing in the Senate, and the Senate won't even pick them up, and they've already announced this year that they're not going to take up a budget. How can we continue to move along when our elected officials won't do the job that they've been elected to do, and that the law requires them to do? Did you know that the law requires both chambers of Congress to pass a budget by April 15th? Did you know that? I've got a bill that was introduced not too long ago called the Pass a Budget Now Act that says if whichever chamber does not pass a budget by April 15th as required by law, that chamber, the members of that chamber, starting on April 16th, they don't get their paychecks. And their paychecks are forfeited, not put into escrow, where they're saved and they can get it later. It's forfeited, and that money goes toward paying down the national debt. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that if we took all of the salary from the Senate and the House, it wouldn't pay down our national debt. But I guarantee you that it's going to create a debt problem for the members of that chamber that don't do their job if they don't get paid. And that's going to incentivize them to start doing what the American people have elected them to do. It's a law. They're not above it. They should be setting the example and pass a budget.
Will it pass?
I'm sorry?
Will it pass?
I don't know, Donna. I don't know. I can tell you that I'm not hopeful that it'll pass because nothing else that we've sent to the Senate has passed. We've passed over 30-some jobs bills to the Senate. We've passed budgets to the Senate. We've passed regulatory reform legislation to the Senate, and it sits stacked up like cordwood. So I'm not hopeful that the Senate will take it up if it would even if it would make it to the Senate. But we're going to have questions. I'm going to give you time to ask questions. Can you see this bizarre diagram here? Well, if it looks busy, if it kind of looks out of control, that's because it is. This is the new health care law that was passed in 2010. This is the new health care law. The administration promised us that the new health care law would create jobs. Yet today, we have 40% of America's businesses, small businesses, telling us that the health care law is the reason why they can't grow and expand their business because of the uncertainty that's being created. Uncertainty around the regulatory burdens that the health care law is placing on them, and uncertainty around things like how the increase in what they're paying for health care premiums. I have talked to I don't know how many job creators up and down the district that have seen increases in their health care premiums upwards of 45%. Now, that's not a job creator, that's a job killer. The administration promised us that this new health care law would control cost. Yet we find out that it's going to cost about $2 trillion more than the administration told us that it was going to cost.